Okay guys, in this video we're going to be discussing the Oliver Super Series and Fleetline Series tractors and what to look out for when you're going to go purchase one. So in this case, we'll start at the very front and work our way all the way to the back. Alright, so at the very front of the tractor we have the wide front end, which in this case is only specific to mine, but if you have a Super Series or a Fleetline tractor, your front ends can range from anything from a standard row crop wide front to the narrow front to the industrial front end, which the 1900 has it back there. You got a couple in array of choices. However, the components to the front end are still all the exact same resemblance to one another. I thought I initially covered this in the 50 series video, but alas I did not. Apparently I did on the first take, but not the second one. Regardless, you do want to look around here on your wheel bearing caps to make sure there's no leaking. That's a good indicator that someone's been taking care of it and the seals aren't leaking. Same with up here on your top and bottom of your spindles. If there's nice fresh grease or relatively new grease there, they've been taking care of it. Obviously make sure your steering arms are nice and straight here, unlike the 1900s, which this one's also in good condition. We have grease over here, no leaking over here, so we're good to go on that. Probably isn't a bad idea to peek in here and you can see that I'm leaking a little bit of oil out of there. Probably wouldn't hurt to fill that up, honestly. You can also check and see how much steering slop you have. I got a decent bit, but there's also a set screw on top of the steering box that you can set to adjust. Normally these front kingpins up here like to wear out. The 770s is quite wore out, and if I were to sit there and move the side tire back and forth, you can sit here and watch it wobble. That's definitely a good point of interest. Spindles, you'll not be able to tell how bad they are unless you take them over a bump and you can see them visibly moving. Wishbones and pitman arms and all that, just make sure they're straight, not bent, joints are tight, good, just stuff along those lines like that. So the radiators in this setup, going up front, usually are very reliable unless you get a hole in them or something like that, a bunch of junk covering them up, or in this case, like these two tractors have right here, thermostat is stuck open, which means coolant's flowing constantly and it never warms up. It's been like that for 5 years, and I really am kicking myself to this day that I haven't fixed them, but we just haven't had the time to. Eventually, I'll get around to it, and you'll see some videos repairing both these because they need it bad. That one actually has a properly functioning thermostat, ironically, even though it's probably the most neglected one here. So the engines themselves are pretty much mainly based off the Waukesha engine platform, although you can get a couple Continentals and other engines sprinkled in here, Detroits, whatnot. The Fleetlines are more tailored a little bit more towards the Waukesha side, and then the Oliver Super Series over here is tailored towards the Waukesha with a mix of everything. The little Super 44s had a Continental 4-cylinder, Super 55 and up to a 99 is a Waukesha diesel, and you can get the Super 99 also with a GM diesel. This is kind of the era where they started sprinkling in extra engine types if you wanted to choose that. But pretty much every single engine type that they threw in was a pretty solid platform, not really many issues. The Detroits were obnoxiously loud, just like any other Screaming Jimmy. I got two of them sitting back there. They're obnoxiously loud. Very reliable, a good platform for more power if you're really wanting to push a little more, but that's a whole nother story. These engines are very good for power buildup. If you really wanted to, you can tear one down and throw a set of M&W pistons in it, or just the M&W kit in general, and you can bump up the horsepower probably about 10-15% right then and there, not including any other work you want to do, such as if you wanted to outsource larger valves, valve seats, etc., etc., etc. They're pretty decent for a bigger platform, but you don't really have much more room to build off of other than that. You're kind of stuck with what you get since it's a 60-plus-year-old gas engine tractor. Overall, the engines in these are very solid, and you won't have many issues with them. So while you will get a very good platform of an engine, you're not entirely scot-free. Some of the engines, like the 144 cubic inch Waukesha here, like this guy, will usually form cracks up back in here sometimes. That's very rare, but I've seen the occasional engine that does it. And this is pretty usual for an old Waukesha engine. When you tear these things down and you get up into the head there and top of the block there, usually you'll have cracking right around your cylinder walls and on top of the deck. But usually you can get away without worrying about it because they're out of the way to the point where it's not going to let anything seep, or it's not really a point of concern unless it's actually near a passageway or something that actually is going to matter to you. So just keep an eye out for that if you ever have to rebuild one. One other issue that I failed to mention as well on these Waukesha engines with the spin-on oil filter base, which 99% of them have, you'll have a little spout here that comes up and out. I believe it is longer on the Fleetline series tractors and shorter on the Super Series tractors. But in this case, well, it's not the same problem, but the threads on here don't want to hold a filter, so it's used oil out of there. But the little spouts in there can break off, and then you're now searching for an oil filter base, which at that rate, go look for the Super Series counterparts. If you have a 66, go look for a Super 66 base. Now, I'll warn you right here now, it's good luck finding one, though. So be aware of that issue. If you have low oil pressure or just not very good filtration, that's probably going to be an issue. These tractors are equipped with generators, whether it be a 6 or 12 volt system. Probably 75% or more will be 6 volt because they only had a year or two run of the Super Series at 12 volt negative ground. Everybody else is 6 volt, which I'm kind of in the middle for 6 volt. I like them. I like the originality of them. But when they don't want to work, it's kind of a pain in the ass, and I'm sure you can hear. Yeah. I don't think I need to say anymore. It's quite easy to convert these to 12 volt though. You just reverse your polarity on your voltage regulator right there, that little black box. I think you change a couple of wires around, switch your grounds obviously from positive to negative. I think you have to change your light bulbs all the way around in the tractor, which at that rate you can just convert to LED, although it's easier on that type of fender right there instead of these clamshells. And you have yourself a 12 volt system. I actually had a 77 with a 12 volt system, and it got up and ran every time you asked it to. I mean, these will get up and run whenever you ask them to too, but it's a little slower on the uptake, to get up and going. Electrical systems and fuel systems on these are pretty much unbeatable. You won't really have much of an issue. If you got a carburetor on a tractor, you might have the occasional timer. You got to clean it up, take it apart, just the basic maintenance. If you have a diesel, you'll more than likely have to worry about your injection pump and injectors going out, maybe some injection lines here and there, but they're still pretty robust as well alongside these. Electrical system, pretty much as straightforward as you get. It's a 50-year-old tractor. If you have an issue, just look for some bare wires or a connection that's not making contact, and voila, there's your problem right there probably. Starters on these usually like to last a while. You can burn them out sometimes, like that one had to have a rebuild not too long ago, but other than that, they're pretty tough. So something that the 4 digits didn't really offer in comparison to the 3 series and below is to the fact that you can get a belt pulley installed right there. That is actually your belt pulley gearbox right there. And in this case, I also have a Power Troll mechanical cultivator lift right here, or just a mechanical lift in general. All it does is just pick and lower the arms up and down. That one has an actual hydraulic pump and a hydroelectric system that does not function. But you have 2 sets of remotes on each, or 1 set of remote on each side, 2 levers, a little 1.5 gallon reservoir, give or take. That's off the top of my head. That's not going to be entirely accurate. But it does have electric solenoids in here, and if you had the electric hydraulic cylinder, you would be able to pull the lever to the side, move it up and down, and the cylinder will have a magnet on it that has the depth stop. That's a whole nother story, but more than likely, if you have one of these that has an intact wiring setup with the hydroelectric cylinder, you just struck gold. You ought to buy that thing right then and there. Those pumps tend to have a weakness where the center piece in them will crack. They'll start pissing fluid out into the rear end. Your rear end overfills, you start blowing seals. It's kind of a whole mess. Most of the time you don't really blow seals. You'll probably notice it before then, but after a while it just starts to cause more and more issues. This one I think is beginning to have that issue actually because of the fact I am getting hydraulic oil coming out of my PTO back here. They aren't afraid to flush hydraulic fluid out of that little centerpiece or any of the gaskets that's attaching to them. They're a really strong system. They're open center, so they're pretty primitive when it comes to technology in comparison today. Not the greatest, but they'll definitely do what you want them to with no questions asked as long as everybody's in happy mood. The Fleetline series also could have been equipped with this setup. However, it's not as common sometimes compared to the Super Series. Pretty much, I'd say it's a 60-40 split, 60% being hydraulics and the 40%'s other. And this one's the other way around. It's probably 40% hydraulic, 60% like mechanical lifts and other things along those lines. The transition to hydraulics was roughly in the 50s when they were switching tractors and noticing that hydraulic power was the way to go. There's no auxiliary transmission in between there. It's just a clutch. It's just your average stuff there if your clutch is worn out. But really, your clutch is really the only thing you're going to worry about. You don't have a chain sprocket. It's just a straight drive shaft all the way through. Your PTO shaft does go through there for your independent PTO, but even then, once again, not really anything to worry about unless you're tackling into it with some sort of mechanical issue. So the transmissions in these guys are pretty robust. It's a Fleetline tractor that's 70 plus years old now. Same goes for that Super back over there. If you go, good Lord. But if you throw high horsepower at it, like you throw an engine swap in there, or I don't know, and you just somehow manage to put more power and torque through it than it can handle. Of course, you're going to have your typical failures, but really on these, you just got to look for seal failures. You pretty much have your axle seals, which I don't think I've ever seen them leak. You got your outer axle seals, which that one's leaking. 6-speed trans, you just check to make sure your levers are good and tight. This one's really tight. Like, you can't hardly tell what gear you're in just because of how tight it is. Other than that, I mean, there's not really much to them. Make sure your boot up there is good and brand new. If it's dry rotted, it's probably let water in there. You might want to drain the oil out of the rear end, put some new oil in it. It's up to you. There's not really a good way to check it. There is a check plug right here that you can pull out and see how good the fluid is, if it's full to it or if it's got milkiness in it, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, I probably need to change the rear end oil in this because it's not looking very good. But other than that, however, you're not really going to harm them. I mean, it's a 70-year-old transmission. This damn thing's built to last. You can't hurt them. Of course, you'll have your normal wear points like paint on your brakes. You'll have paint missing on your clutch. Floorboard, which actually impressively doesn't have anything missing. There's your serial number plate. Most of these will be almost always underneath here. I think the Super's switched to about this area, if I remember correctly. Fleetlines have the thimble switch, as I like to call it. Ignition and lights, and then strictly lights over there. Got your choke, gear shift patterns, and your gauges, and light. Most of the time, those don't function anyway, so don't worry about that one entirely. The seats on these, no comparison. This one right here especially is probably the comfiest seat I've ever rode in on a tractor, and that's almost impossible for me to say, considering it's a metal pan seat, so that makes no sense, especially with no backrest, you know. But I'm not hardly putting any weight on this. Those torsion springs right there, is the best you'll ever get. It's dependent from tractor to tractor, though. We rebuilt the seat on that 770, and it has the same setup, give or take a few upgrades because it's newer. It's okay. The springs in it I don't think are just right, and or they're just too tight. An old rubber maybe that they sold us. That one's as tough as woodpecker lips. Sucks. The springs don't work. It needs rebuilt. Usually what happens is that they'll wear out and just sink straight to the ground. In this case, for some reason, mine's worn out and stuck. But this is a nice prime example. This thing will just absolutely sit down, and it's like riding an old 70s land yacht car. It just sits there and floats over anything you want. So on the back side of the tractor, this is kind of more or less what you're going to get for each model. It may vary from model to model or just tractor to tractor, honestly. But it's pretty straightforward. This is a pretty basic tractor. You got your drawbar, PTO, and that's about it. This one's not very complicated in the least. You got your toolbox here, which surprisingly has no lid. I'll have to source one out. All right, so this is where we get into the interesting stuff. Sheet metal. It's going to be about a 50-50 split usually on what you're going to get. Sometimes you'll get tractors, and in this case, we actually got two very good tractors with good straight sheet metal that aren't beat up. Good indicators of that are definitely going to be your front grille here, if it's bent in at all anywhere. If you still have your medallion up front, if you have your badge up front here, it says Oliver, there you go. There's a little bit of straightness going on there from something that you got dinged. Of course, your contour meeting with your shell. I think it got bent at some points. Now we have a gap. This side has a gap right there, but it's pretty good. If you can look down the hood and it's nice and straight, that's a good sign. It's been taken care of. Side panels on these, the Super Series is all open. You're gonna have every single one of these, no exceptions. I don't care if you bought one that has those side panels on it off the Fleetlines. They're always open. This is the side panel you're gonna get. And another good way to tell if it's a Super versus a Fleetline right off the bat too is this guy right here. Industrials and the short tractors in general will be an exception. That's where you look at the serial number and just figure it out from there. But if it's a row crop and it's got these, it's a Super. End of story. Usual wear points will be down here where you have screws in. I think the standard factory setup was bolts instead of these nice, really fancy screws that I got in here. I quite like these. I'd recommend upgrading to them. Very nice. Side panels are in nice, tough shape. They slide in and out here. I think they should have spring. No, that's the panels over there. Yeah, there you go. They have springs in it. You want to do all your hardware here. You have a spring right here. Pull them up, slide them, and it pops right out there. Scooches back, out you go. Like I said, same thing here. Look for your contour, look for gaps. Battery box. Supers have the opening battery box is the same as the Fleetlines, and I think in 57 they switched to the style over there, which is, as you can see, it has the springs on the side right there, and you have bolts and or wing nuts. If you have that tractor, it's wing nuts that you have to undo to flip it over and open, and you actually have a better access hole compared to these guys. I don't mind these, but they like to rattle a lot when they're not tight, and that's all the more room you get to play with. So, it's all right. This one didn't actually have a light on here for some reason. Don't know why. I have 2 original gauges, pretty nice. Pretty much same setup for the Super Series. My bad, the serial tag's actually in the same spot. Some of these will have a tachometer, and they'll be mounted right here. Super 77s and 88s are on the other side, and the Super 99s always have a tack. Super 44s and 55s. 55s have tacks, and 44s I don't think do. I think they're just the 3 main gauges, and that's it. This one's really worn out. There's not really much of an ounce of green left on here, which I'm not really bothered by. It's a work tractor. Back over here, when you get onto the 3 beauties, the 66 to the 88, most of the time these exhausts will have been replaced with some other weird and fancy schmancy exhaust setup. Usually I'm fine with, the mufflers above the exhaust, but that's not how they came from the factory. You'll have a big old fancy fat muffler underneath there that comes through the sheet metal there, and then you have a nice fancy straight pipe that is silver. And in this case, it is tiny as all get out because it's a 66. But that's how they are with these. Super Series have external mufflers, so that one is technically correct. It's not an OEM one, but it's still correct. Another little side factoid that I found a while ago that actually will be a really good indicator if it's been well taken care of is if you have this mesh right behind your grill. Unlike this one, it does not have it, which I think it should have had one because I remember seeing grill mesh up in here somewhere. So it used to have one, but it does not anymore. There you go. I just noticed a little wear spot right there. They actually had to weld in a piece on the restoration for this tractor to work. And I'm sure there's more where that came from, similar to it. The Fleetlines all have these side panels, which are, like I said, you push them in on the little clips there. They're spring-loaded. You pop them off. They have little thumb tab screws down there that go 90 degrees to open and close them. If it's diesel, it's going to have a bulge on the left side right around this area for the injection pump where it sticks out a little bit. Those are where I'll get out to find a good condition. This one, honestly, itself is not in very great condition with things like this. You can see it bends in there, bends there. This one's kind of been in rough shape, but it's still here and ready to go nonetheless. That's probably going to be your biggest point to indicate whether or not the tractor is well taken care of. It's a Fleetline. Is simply because of the fact that those are probably the most pain in the ass to farmers. They're kind of a love-hate relationship. They either hate them and they're gone, which then tells you they didn't take care of it very well, or is at least a good sign to. It doesn't mean they didn't. Or it has them and they're beat all hell and back. Once again, another good sign that it's probably not going to be exactly a great tractor. And if they're in perfect shape, they've either been swapped or they've been original and well taken care of. If you have one that's pretty much straight as an arrow, You might want to run away with that tractor because it's probably in good shape. Just more things like this too. You can tell this one's been dinged up and it's had a rough life. Sheet metal itself's not in terrible shape, but the actual grill's been pretty much toasted. It's probably about time to put a new one on here and just keep this guy as decoration somewhere in the house. So just for the sake of some people, we'll go ahead and do a platform walkover. This is pretty much what you're going to get when you're sitting on a row crop tractor of a mid-sized machine. So pretty much a 66 through an 88. Got your throttle, steering wheel, gear shift lever, and if you ever have any questions on the gear shift pattern, that usually has a medallion right here. It's pretty simple to understand, actually. I'm in neutral right now. I'm in the bottom neutral more specifically, so I'm at that end there, and I can wiggle back and forth. I'm up in the center. Now I'm in the top neutral. So that would be third, that'd be sixth, etc. Pretty simple to understand. Got choke here. If you have a diesel, that will be the shut off. Diesels, this button here won't be your starter button, it will be your preheat button, and then you'll have a second lever down there for your starting. Looks exactly like this guy. But on gassers, you have a start button, light switch, oil pressure gauge, discharge or charge on your battery, and temperature gauge. And then of course, like I said, it's optional, but you have a tachometer. Hydraulics, left side, right side, gear shift, brakes, center brakes, clutch, and that's pretty much it. You got a PTO back here, and that's it. There's nothing over here. It's really straightforward. That's pretty much all there is. And one more point of interest for the Super Series specifically is that in 1957, January 1st of 57 to be exact, these tractors got what was called the upgraded Super Series, where pretty much they took this tractor and revamped it just a little bit. They turned that nut just about 90 degrees, is what I'm saying. The wheels got painted from green to red because farmers didn't entirely enjoy that. And they tried saving on paint with the green wheels, I would imagine, for cost, but it didn't really go over well with customers and dealers. The electrical system got an overhaul. It went from 6 volt to 12 volt negative ground. Like I've said earlier, it's pretty easy to convert to that, but if it's before 57, you're going to have a 6 volt unless it's been converted already. Battery boxes got switched to the newer style where it swings open like that one. You'll have raised all of our lettering right here. And if I remember correctly, these on the axles, I don't think exist anymore. There's blank spaces, if I remember right. That one's not exactly very present on the mind. The Super Series did see the introduction of a key, which this one I don't think is the correct key for it. But instead of just being strictly an ignition key, you actually had a two-position key where you could start it instead of just an on-off. And they went away with the starter button. That was also part of the improved Super Series, which I really like that because combining everything in the key just made it so much more easier. These starter buttons can be very fickle sometimes. I've had to replace this one 3 or 4 times now. And I finally went and bought a quality one from a parts store, and it hasn't given me any trouble since. But unless you have an original one like that one, or if you have a new OEM one, or just a new direct replacement one like that, don't buy junk Chinese ones. I know they're all probably made in China, but you can tell the quality in them just by when you go to press them. This one's tenfold better than the last 3 I've put in it, and so far, like I said, no issues. A good common upgrade if you really want to make your tractor spin a little faster on 6 volts to put a little bit heavier gauge wiring on here. I'm pretty sure this is welding wire, if I remember right. This stuff is the way to go. You run it up there to your push button start, and you run it to your ground. You'll pretty much start every time unless your battery's junk. That was probably one of the best upgrades I ever did, besides getting a proper starting button for it, was putting that wiring setup on here. It starts every time now. This one's still stuck on the OEM. Yeah, I want to say it's like a 2 gauge, maybe 4 gauge wire. It's a little bit smaller, or size smaller than the welding cable, but it'll still crank your tractor over. Just won't be as fast. Alrighty guys, so if you enjoyed that video, go ahead and smash the like button and share the heck out of this. Maybe it helps somebody else that's looking to buy one of these tractors out a little bit. And if you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe button, and I'll go ahead and post some more stuff like this, because I enjoy making these. Even though I'm not exactly an expert, I still like ranting on about what I know about these. So anyways, thanks for watching.